Have you ever wondered if you are being lied to? Do you ever just get that gut-wrenching feeling that something isn't right when you're interviewing a subject? True deception detection requires unique skills to dissect and interpret micro-expressions and other involuntary tells the subject displays. In this video, I will break down those subtle physiological cues that you need to know about, from those averted gazes to the vocal shifts and the restless fidgeting that every private investigator needs to know. Before we discuss how to establish a good baseline, let's first look at what is often referred to as the Pinocchio effect. There are several facets to the Pinocchio effect, so let's take a close look at each one in more detail. The first is the physiological Pinocchio effect. This refers to an observable change in a person's nose or other facial temperatures when they are lying. But it can also mean that they are under stress or they are exerting a lot of physical or even mental effort. So it definitely is not an end-all, do-all lie detector test, to be sure. And well, how do you measure these temperature changes anyway? Obviously, you could use a thermal camera, but if you're sitting there holding a FLIR, pointing it at the subject's face while interviewing them, that might add even more stress. There are regular cameras that have thermal capability too, but then there are the questions like, will the subject let you video record the interview? And even if they do allow the recording, do you have the expertise to stand up in court and decipher what the thermal readings really mean? And for most of us, including me, well, the simple answer is no. I am not an expert in thermal imaging. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. Next is what is referred to as the linguistic Pinocchio effect, which is watching for specific speech patterns when the subject answers questions. Liars, or better put, individuals trying to hide something or trying to be deceptive, will oftentimes use more words and longer sentences while explaining things and answering questions. This is often a subtle clue that the subject's subconscious mind is trying to make their story more convincing. They may also tend to use third-person pronouns, he, she, they, instead of Bob or Mary, or they may even slip up and use them in reference to themselves. And one that I often see is the increase in what I call negative emotional words. In other words, profanity and other expletives. This again can be a sign that the subconscious mind is trying to make their story more convincing, more colorful, if you will. Now remember, none of this is worth a dime without establishing a good baseline, and we will discuss that in detail here in a moment too. Besides watching out for the Pinocchio effect, signs we also need to be aware of are all of the micro expressions that could lead to suspicions of deceit. These micro-expressions might include masking or faking a smile. This is often observable because the subject only uses their mouth to smile, not the muscles around their eyes. As a general rule, if we have a genuine smile, it includes the use of other facial muscles, like the ones around our eyes. And it often also includes those crow's feet wrinkles around the eyes too. A fake smile is, well, fake. It is just a simple smile with no real meaning behind itself. Liars and those trying to be deceitful will also often display quick and sudden signs of grief, sadness, fear, and anxiety. For instance, you might see an exaggerated contraction of the full forehead, or a sudden tight-lipped pose combined with signs of distress in their eyes. They might also have fleeting flashes of fear, such as a quick widening of the eyes or sudden raising of the eyebrows. Now, you need to keep in mind a completely honest and innocent person may show similar signs too, so it, again, is not the end-all to detecting deceit, to be sure. Some other unconscious body signs to watch for when a person may be lying or being deceitful are things like sudden, shallow, or even faster breathing patterns. Their heart rate and blood flow may increase too, but again, this is often very hard to tell with the naked eye and without specialized medical equipment. A deceitful person may start sweating too or suddenly get dry mouth syndrome. This is one reason of many that the police will always offer the subject a water when they are interrogating them. And well, it is something I do when I am interviewing a subject in a controlled environment too. Now, it would look kind of odd if I was out doing a neighborhood canvass and I offered someone a drink of water at their own house, so you have to exercise some logic before doing this. Muscle tension is a huge cue, too. Do they suddenly tense up? Were they relaxed, then all of a sudden sitting straight up in the chair? And of course, you need to pay attention to the pitch or the tone of their voice. If they get stressed, they may tighten their throat and their vocal cords, and their voice may suddenly go up a notch or two in pitch. A big thing I watch for is what I will refer to as self-soothing things. Things like touching their face a lot, touching their neck a lot, touching their nose a lot, or lip biting. And here is one that I have seen way too many times. You would think a person would be aware of their actions, but this little subtle clue is given off by their subconscious mind. They answer questions with a yes or a no, but they're nodding their head in the opposite direction. Watch the eyes too. Do they make sudden eye movements, looking all over the place, but never making eye contact with you? Or is their eye contact over intense? Are they always staring right into your eyes? Neither of these actions is really normal, so make note of it and watch to see if there is excess blinking or rubbing of the eyes. And another one, sort of like the negative head nod when they say yes or no, are the delayed hand gestures. If the person is prone to using hand gestures when they talk or explain things a lot, but they are being deceitful, they may make those hand gestures after the thought because their mind was busy working on building their story. Now, for any of this to be useful in any way, you first have to understand what I call the baseline principle. You need to have a baseline and understanding of how the subject normally answers questions truthfully and responds to normal statements. This is where most PIs fail miserably. They go back to what they have seen on TV and the movies. They just jump right in with questions and accusations. Where were you last Friday when Bob Smith got shot? Why did you leave the bar so quickly after the fight? When you left the bar, you hit that brown pickup with your car. Why didn't you report it? These type of questions, or any sudden questions or allegations that make the interview look more like a stereotypical interrogation, will make the subject clam up pretty quick. Instead, you need to start with baseline questions. These are questions or statements even like, wow, it sure is hot today. Then you sit back and you let them respond. These should be simple, factual questions or statements that you also already know the answer to. So you work over at the factory. How long have you been there? I have heard that's a good place to work. What is your favorite thing about working there? So you have 3 kids. What are their ages? Teenagers are so tough to buy Christmas presents for. What tricks do you use to find out what they really want? Make sure when you're asking these questions, you are paying close attention to how they react. When do they become relaxed? And when do they tense up? How do they react when they are talking about pleasant things versus unpleasant things? Now, those are just example questions. You need to also have your own process for asking baseline questions and for conducting the interview. And remember, each subject is going to be different too. Not all will have kids. Not all will have jobs. Not all will be open talkers. The big key is to know when and how to transition from baseline questioning to investigative interviewing. I usually do this at a point when I have seen several key reactions from them in both the positive and the negative ways. This gives me a good idea of what to watch for, but then sometimes they aren't going to play the game of baselining. Sometimes they just say, "Can we get on with it?" Then I just get on with it. I start my interview. But my goal is to always build rapport first. Make sure the subject is comfortable, and I also try to never sound accusatory in any way. Now, I hope this video has helped you. If so, go down, hit that thumbs up, and click on that join button to see all of the benefits to becoming a PI Guide channel member.